Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne. Kelley Lane is co-hosting today. This is a fully independent podcast. Lend your support patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. Afshin Rattansi is here today, and we discussed the Biden transition team, the direction that a Biden cabinet would take us in war and foreign policy, Brexit, and the US, UK, and EU relationship, and also the state of affairs in the media. Afshin Rattansi is an award-winning journalist, author, and host of the show Going Underground, which airs 3 times weekly on the RT network. He's previously worked for the BBC Radio, CNN International, Press TV, Al Jazeera, and various other international media organizations. And he began his journalism at The Guardian and still contributes to Counterpunch. We recorded this on November 16th, 2020. Afshin Rattansi's here, speaking to us from the UK. Thanks so much for coming on the show. It's great to talk with you.
Hi, Joanne.
Kelley Lane is here, guest hosting. So happy to have her back on again. Thanks again, Kelley, for coming on the show and helping me out with this.
Thank you, Joanne.
We want to first talk a little bit about Afshin. If you could just take a couple of minutes to just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I host Going Underground on RT, but do other journalism as well, though Going Underground is the kind of flagship show from Britain on the RT network. And, well, people can look it up on our YouTube channel. I think it made the headlines just in the past few days, actually, because on Election Day we had none other than the great America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani.
Oh, yeah.
Talking about some pretty amazing accusations as regards the person who your so-called mainstream media now regard as the president of the United States.
Right. Kelley and I were talking about how we really appreciate your work and your interview style. I think you're one of the few people who push back on your guests. And, you know, in a polite way, of course, not in a hostile way, but in a way that is just really needed. I don't know if the British media is the same, but in America, there's a lot of fanboy, fangirl kind of stuff going on. There's a narrative that's repeated over and over again. You know, your interviews are a little bit more in-depth. And you can tell when you're maybe, I don't know, slightly skeptical. But anyway, I think you just either push for a little more information.
There's a strange thing here in Britain because we're regulated by an official government-appointed regulator that says that all broadcast media has to be impartial, fair, and these arguably very subjective terms, which means that we are constantly under attack from the British authorities, whether it be in the media or the official regulator, because of course there's a huge amount of resentment for foreign ownership, as long as it's not American ownership. They don't mind American owned media here in Britain, but obviously we're funded by the Russian government, the Russian taxpayer, mandated through the Russian Duma. That's something the British authorities don't like. I mean, we have nuclear missiles here in Britain aimed at Moscow, so obviously they don't like it. So at the same time, we have to be very wary of deep censorship problems here in Britain that exist and that have certainly targeted us over, say, coverage of Syria and certain foreign policy positions. And if we ever use the phrase class war, which we did when there was a horrific social housing fire in West London, it makes the front pages of the newspapers here because they say, why is Going Underground mentioning any kind of difficulties between the social classes, socioeconomic classes? This must be because they want a 1917 style Russian revolution. But of course, our team are mostly British anyway.
So I think this would be a great time for this question. I find, anytime I mention your show and other great shows on RT, or I feel like they can be openly critical of America, which you don't always find on our mainstream news here. People, a lot of people just instantly, oh, that's Russia today. So what would you say to anyone who says your content is controlled by the Russian government?
I mean, I have a long history at the BBC where I have to say that we were threatened every single day by the British government about the way the BBC program that I worked for, the Today program, talked about issues in any way that contradicted the government line. We were threatened with not having certain guests and so on. And I actually wrote about it for the scholarly journal Critical Quarterly, because it was in the run-up to the Iraq War. What I'd say to them is they should watch our coverage when we do it of Russia. I should say that we act as a kind of counterpunch. So obviously we want to be against prevailing illusions within society. And helpfully, criticisms of Russia in NATO countries are very healthy. When Vladimir Putin's government abuses human rights of Russians, the NATO media are often very robust and can be very accurate in a way that some investigative journalists in Russia aren't. So I suppose what I'd say to them is when we cover Russia, they should see our work on LGBTQ rights in Russia. They should see our coverage of oligarch power, of increasing neoliberalism, of the type of neoliberal economics being practiced in Russia, which is dangerous to Russia's citizens. Anyone who has seen the interviews we have done with the Russian ambassador in London criticizing policies from the Russian government will see that by no means do we pull our punches. And I should say, actually, that when, perhaps because we're RT, we do get some high-profile Russian guests sometimes. When those guests appear on NATO nation media, even whether it be CNN or your network media in the United States, I think we give it a tougher time. We give Russia a tougher time than those networks.
So to get into some of our topics here, one of the things we wanted to talk to you about was the potential likely Biden administration, and in particular being generally a war and foreign policy podcast, their foreign policy. And so we don't know yet who it's going to be in the cabinet. We have seen some things with the transition team. There have been some leaks and speculations about Michelle Flournoy and some others, around him, Tony Blinken, some names that we're very familiar with. So I just wanted to, before we get into like what you anticipate, have you heard anything about what's the word? What's the word on who's going to be in Biden's cabinet, or your best guess?
I bet Kelley's in the know. That's what I think. I haven't heard. I mean, obviously on Going Underground, we've talked to a fair few of the progressive Democrat side of things, and they're similarly out of the loop. One thing I think we are pretty sure about is that Biden is a man who's been funded by multinational corporations all his political life. He began in Delaware with the DuPont Corporation funding his early beginnings. DuPont, infamous, of course, for Agent Orange, dropped on Vietnam. There is all this speculation. There are all these names put out. If these names weren't the correct names, I would presume that Biden's clause would be out there. But the so-called mainstream media in the United States, which heavily supports the Democrats over Donald Trump, clearly seems to think that it's fine interviewing people like Trump's old friend, John Bolton, friend until recently, and think that foreign policy is fine coming from him. The fact that people like Bolton can talk confidently and support a Biden administration, I think, speaks volumes. The amount of money poured in from the weapons companies and the military industrial complex into the Biden coffers means they obviously expect some payback. And in Biden, they have a candidate who has been pro-war since from the death squads of Central America to Panama, to Grenada, a Commonwealth country. I'm speaking to you from Britain, although Britain didn't do anything about it, to, of course, the way he packed the Foreign Relations Committee of Congress with pro-war voices to facilitate the Iraq War, which displaced, wounded, or killed tens of millions of men, women, and children.
And I think as much as you can go and look up this information yourself and see who he has on his transition team, a lot of people still seem to be either in the dark about it, or they believe somehow that they're going to be able to push Biden left later, which to me is laughable. But I think that's a lot of the problem is we still in America, most people are woefully uninformed about what the U.S. empire does around the world. I happened to catch you on a program, I believe it was on RT also, as a guest, and you were talking about the terrorist attack in Nice. And my jaw about hit the floor when you just tied it. Like you'd start talking about the US, UK, foreign policy and what we do going around destabilizing other countries. And this is the downstream effect. And I think most Americans just still do not see that because our media doesn't cover it. And
I think more alarming actually at the moment. I mean, hopefully there must be some recognition of the way that Obama and the Obama-Biden administration funded what would become Al-Qaeda and ISIS-Daesh in Syria. Trump thankfully kind of retreated from trying to further destabilize that region by trying to overthrow President Assad of Syria. But what's been happening in the past few days has been the Horn of Africa. There is violence, tens of thousands of refugees fleeing Ethiopia for Sudan. Why should that be happening suddenly right now, given that Eritrea and Ethiopia on the Horn of Africa, which controls the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, which the global shipping goes through, why has that suddenly happened? Well, some people are already suspecting that Obama, who famously supported the brutal regime of Ethiopia before the present regime of Ethiopia, there are expectations that the Tigray Front, which is a kind of front in parts of Ethiopia, which bombed Eritrea on Saturday night, they're already thinking they can further destabilize Ethiopia and Eritrea in this crucial area where China and the global south are all investing. It's an important area, rich in minerals and in people. Why is that suddenly happening? Could it be a prospective return of old Obama State Department types that are going to create more instability in Africa, as they did so infamously under Obama, who, do we have to remind everyone, destroyed Africa's richest per capita country, Libya, when Gaddafi died. And we have that famous video footage of Hillary Clinton laughing and smiling. And of course, that pulled the cork on the refugee crisis that we suffer today here in Europe because of the Mediterranean and the thousands that drowned seeking a better life. Yes,
we came, we saw, he died. Something to that effect.
Aha, the laugh, that was the thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, the problem, I think, is, as Glenn Greenwald, I think, so succinctly put it when he came out to talk about what happened at The Intercept, is you've got this union of power with the establishment Democrats, the media, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and they all work. I mean, yes, having Bolton on CNN. I mean, it's all part of the resistance, I guess.
Well, I mean, it bodes really ill for the future, clearly. And I mean, I don't know what the so-called progressive Democrats feel. Perhaps we'll only know what they feel when the first bombers of a Biden administration are launched against. The rumor is that it would be Syria, because the people that are named for possible foreign State Department team personnel are those who hated Obama for being a peacemonger, for not going further with the so-called red lines of the illegitimate claims, as we now hear from OPCW sources about Syrian use of chemical weapons. Could those progressive voices actually only begin to fully comprehend what they've done by supporting Biden in those primaries when there is a war that again kills or wounds or displaces maybe hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children?
And they're really not trying to hide it either. The focus on bipartisanship also extend, if I'm going to take one concrete thing as an example. In 2016, Michelle Flournoy and I think it's a Center for New American Security think tank that she ran. But she was in league with a number of the considered leading voices in the foreign policy establishment. They put out, because they were, absolutely certain that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and therefore they were pretty bold about talking as they do out in the open, but the press doesn't cover this kind of thing very well. But there's a very out in the open forum where the foreign policy establishment publishes things, talks about things. And in 2016, they put out this big presentation and a PDF paper called Extending American Power, Strategies to Expand U.S. Engagement in a Competitive World Order. And they're very, very clear that it's an imperial strategy. It's the liberal world order and norms and world order. And these are tantamount, and they must be continued. We must remain dominant, and no matter what it takes. I mean, at the end of it, I'll just read you one paragraph here where they say, the task of preserving a world order is both difficult and never ending. Success when it comes is rarely permanent, but must be reinforced and built upon. Failures will be frequent, but the right response is not to retreat. Instead, we should learn, retool, prepare, and do a better job with the next challenge. And they just talk about it being hard and sort of never ending. It's amazing how blatant it is. And another thing they stress is that it is bipartisan. And so we have the leading neoconservative and neoliberal voices here. This is their strategy. And I am almost certain, most of these people openly supported Biden. And there are rumors that some of them, including Flournoy, will be coming in to his cabinet.
I mean, these kinds of people and their adoration of American exceptionalism is slightly different this term than it was back when Obama thought he could destroy Libya. I think there were voices on going underground from Beijing and from Moscow admitting their failure at preventing Obama's destruction of that country. I asked senior people in both places and said, well, why didn't you do more? Is it now not time to return to a more multipolar world? Well, if the kind of people you just mentioned, Joanne, are going to return to the State Department and the Pentagon, along with the massive K Street lobbying of weapons companies, we do live in a slightly more multipolar world, arguably. Will Moscow really just sit back and allow President Biden to make Putin pay, as he said in the run-up to the election, after the years of Trump administration absurd attempts to claim that the American electoral system is so fragile that a couple of Russian Facebook ads, not even directly from the Kremlin, these are presumably Russian accounts from Russian sources, that kind of propaganda, that kind of continuous barrage of anti-Russian and anti-Chinese propaganda. Well, if the state and the Pentagon under Biden think that they can threaten China in the South China Sea with ramping up the base building that was already continuing under Trump, let alone the kind of mass expulsion of diplomats under Trump and the reinforcement of troops on Russia's borders, we're seeing changes in South America, maybe even Brazil now. Venezuela withstood the Trump and Obama attempts to overthrow its government. Maybe things are changing a little when it comes to a multipolar world, and Beijing and Moscow won't just lay back next time Biden and his state and Pentagon friends want to destroy another global South country.
Yeah, I mean, their plans for Syria in 2016 will have to be revised. That's for sure, because things have changed. But I mean, they're openly saying the task of preserving a world order is both difficult and never ending. So it's a double down. And along those lines, with the UK, I'm curious. Oh, Kelley, you know what? Before I switch to a different topic, let me just ask you if you've got something on this.
Oh, no, I just wanted to, before, I know Afshin doesn't have a lot of time, I have to ask him his thoughts on Assange and what a Biden administration, if you have any thoughts on that, what that's going to look like for him.
Well, Joe Biden called Julian Assange famously a high-tech terrorist. He was a great sponsor of the Patriot Act, that Obama administration that prosecuted more whistleblowers than all other U.S. presidents put together. Assange is just down the road from where I am at HMP Belmarsh prison. People are dying there this year. There are reports now of gang violence in the prison in Belmarsh, this high security prison where the UN Special Rapporteur Niels Meltzer claims Julian Assange is being tortured. It is true that Trump went through with the prosecution that Obama didn't, but of course Obama infamously was responsible de facto for the torture of Chelsea Manning, one of the sources for WikiLeaks. Very difficult to say. If you judge Biden by the past, there will be no let up in the persecution of Julian Assange, and there certainly will be more prosecutions of whistleblowers, because Biden has repeatedly said that whistleblowers of Assange's ilk have no right to expose the secrets that they did. So it's a very deeply worrying time for freedom of the press under any administration to do with Joe Biden.
It seems that perhaps what stopped Obama was the concern that if they prosecute WikiLeaks for publishing, then they're having to do the same thing with, the so-called reputable media, the New York Times, etc. So there's been some confusion. I think Kamala Harris sided with Senator Wyden in saying it was dangerous to call WikiLeaks, didn't agree with calling WikiLeaks the non-state party, whatever, hostile terrorist organization. But she was very clear. So I think some people thought that maybe, this means she could be a part in shifting something, more favorable towards Assange. But she was very clear in this report. She says, I'm not a supporter of WikiLeaks. I think they did serious harm to the country. She's just concerned about that differentiation between WikiLeaks and real journalism.
Kamala Harris, of course, an unknown quantity when it comes to these sorts of measures. Famously, she was all for prison labor, which no doubt they have a great time talking together, Biden and her, about mass incarceration, maybe. But you have a point there in the sense that they do have a very close relationship to the oligarchs who own U.S. media, and the impact of any Assange indictment or conviction at a grand jury in Virginia would have implications for their best friends at the New York Times and the Amazon Washington Post. So perhaps that would hold sway, and Biden would remember why Obama didn't prosecute Julian Assange, and maybe there is some possibility of hope there. Of course, a lot of people I'm speaking to also, perhaps in vain, think there is a possibility that Donald Trump may give him a free pass. It's not really a pardon if he's not even been convicted. Assange has never been convicted of anything. Could Trump pardon him on his exit from the White House? Millions of people, let alone hundreds of thousands of journalists all around the world, are hoping so.
Yes, we can hope so.
Yeah. I have one more thing, if you have time for one more question. I saw a speech from Boris about 2 weeks ago, I think, and along, on the backdrop, on the behind his podium was "Build Back Better," and that is Joe Biden's website is "Build Back Better," and that was his first, I'd say, his main slogan. And then we've got the World Economic Forum with their grand strategy, their Great Reset strategy, which looks like something, I don't know, like cartoon villains to me. And it's hard to believe they're even serious about it. It's such a huge strategy from Klaus Schwab and his team there. So why this the adoption of this slogan? Is it something we should pay attention to? Is it just politics? How significant is that, do you think?
Well, Britain is in a unique position right now. Boris Johnson, who just escaped death, apparently, from coronavirus, is now self-isolating again after having to, under the regulations here, having to self-isolate because of coming into contact with someone with coronavirus. We've got 50,000 dead and counting here. We're the worst hit country in Europe. We have a higher death rate per capita than the United States under Trump's presiding over coronavirus, and we have Brexit coming up. Of course, on the left, there were those who hoped of a Lexit, the escaping of Britain from the neoliberal European Union. It seems now the United Kingdom will do everything it can to get a US trade deal, which means Britain, and I know many people accuse it of being a vassal state of the United States, will now do anything a Biden administration tells it to do to get that trade deal, both for electoral success, for the success of the donors to the Conservative Party of Boris Johnson, and to reclaim some kind of dignity as the poor planning and poor strategy after the Brexit vote come to fruition in just days, really. New Year's Eve, lorry parks are already steady and ready to cope with the massive customs duties that may happen. And of course, Biden has come out clearly against Boris Johnson in his attempts to apparently contravene international law as regards the Good Friday Agreement. Britain arguably will become more of a vassal state of Washington than ever before. Maybe you won't even need a visa anymore. Maybe you don't need a visa. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the Obama-Biden administration was very vocal and openly against Brexit. I think Obama even went over there and gave a speech right before the referendum vote, which was kind of shocking. I mean, in my view, I didn't want my president interfering in some other country's business, you know. But yeah, I thought, where's this slogan coming from, and why are they all adopting the same
Maybe
slogan?
It's the same PR and marketing consultancies that are doing all this work, just as the same big bank consultancy companies are running our responses to coronavirus.
Maybe there was a merger we don't know about.
What do you feel the general mood is there about Trump presumably leaving the White House? Are people happy? Do they see? I mean, we get bombarded constantly with everything terrible about Trump. Not a whole lot of talk about his policies, but more just identity politics. Do you feel like that's the general consensus there too? Are most people like happy and it's going to be
well, you know, ever since you gained independence from us, there's always been a latent anti-Americanism and envy and jealousy on this side of the pond of that country. So the Trump phenomenon fed into that. People did try to explain, some journalists, including myself, tried to explain, surely Trump at least has a level of transparency about the nature of American exceptionalism that we haven't seen before, even if he's just the same as the other side. But that didn't really wash with certainly the liberal elites here, who characterized Trump as a monster, not for the not ever understanding that actually Trump arguably created fewer wars and certainly created chances for peace in the world in a way that was much better than his predecessor, Barack Obama, infamous for those caging of immigrants that he began on the southern states of the United States, and Trump stopped.
Yes, absolutely. We've heard so much about this in the media here, but you know, when I've shown people, we'll hear pictures of kids in cages. This is under Obama. It's, I don't know, just falls on deaf ears. It's kind of shocking. I can only hope that maybe this level of scrutiny that more people are giving, you know, looking at what our politicians actually do, not what they say, will continue, and maybe there will be enough push to at least. I don't know that I believe it will really push Biden left, but hope to elect people that actually do what they say they're going to do, maybe in the future. With journalists like you, Afshin, and thank you, because really it's every time you journalists speak out the truth freely, I think it encourages others to do the same. And so I think as dismal as it has seemed with our mainstream corporate backed media, it is refreshing to see people like you and Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi. And I mean, probably like I can count on both hands, but you guys have powerful voices, and a lot of America is listening. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Your show is fantastic, and just keep it up. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today. I know you have a very busy schedule.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Julian said, was it Julian who said courage is contagious? I hope so.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Afshin Rattansi. Follow him on Twitter at Afshin Rattansi, AFSHIN Also find his show Going Underground on RT. This podcast is independent media, so listener support's really important. Patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire, PayPal.me/AroundTheEmpirePod. You can find the podcast on any mobile podcast app, on the website AroundTheEmpire.com, on Patreon, and on YouTube. And if you listen on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire, and we'll see you next time. Take good care, everybody.